John, let us know.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
Today is Monday, March 8th. It is 2 p.m. and this is a business meeting for the Mobile City Planning Commission to discuss comments received regarding a proposed new zoning ordinance, also known as the Unified Development Code. The meeting will proceed according to the agenda. The meeting is being live streamed for the public. Commission members and staff, please remember to keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking to the meeting attendees. A roll call, myself, Libby Latham, Jennifer Denson,
Here.
Art Blackwell, Shirley Sessions, Alan Cameron, Taylor Atchison,
Here.
Matt Anderson,
Here.
Nick Omberger,
Here.
Bess Rich,
Here.
Don Hembry, Jay Stubbs.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next, I have adoption of the agenda. Members, you have been sent it. Is there a motion for adoption of the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of adoption of the agenda?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is adopted. Our order of business begins with edits from staff.
Okay, and I just want to point out for the record, I just admitted Ms. Sessions into the meeting, so she is here as well. Go ahead and start. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, we would like to present to y'all some general corrections from what has been provided to you. Some of it's a little basic, but it does need the commission's attention and consent. We have various typos. On page 7, you'll see that rear yard is spelled incorrectly. There's also a typo on page 36 where there's an additional use category title road going across. That needs to be deleted. If you will flip forward to page 110, there is an extra space between setback and S, which needs to be deleted. And there needs to be a correction in this overhead, but the approval criteria, number 1, the Board of Zoning Adjustment will not approve an application for special exception unless the shall should be replaced with will. And again, that's on page 239. On page 314, and I know I'm moving it somewhat quickly, but these are basic typing issues. On page 314, all residential subdivisions except 4. So, the S needs to be added to the end of subdivisions, and then boy needs to become 4. On page 365, this is in Appendix A in the Downtown Development District Standards. In that table at the bottom of page 365, the last column, buildings per lot, it's the maximum number of buildings. That needs to be changed from 2 to 3. And that'll coincide with the currently adopted Downtown Development District standards.
I thought it was changed from 3 to 2.
What's printed is 2. It's in T4, correct?
3 max.
Yeah, it needs to change.
From 2 to 3. Okay.
Yes,
So it should say from 2 to, because it says 2 max now, it should say 3 max.
yes, that is correct. Okay, continuing within the DDD, actually, no, I'm sorry.
Appendix A.
Hold on, that's in the village, I'm pretty sure. It's 329. Yes. Yes, I'm sorry, moving back to Article 13 on page 328. Bottom of the page. Section 6413-5, supplementary regulations. Secondary needs to be capitalized. Then I'm sorry, going back to the DDD on page 383. Your chart there. You need in the pedestrian forecourt, we're deleting the by right in T4 and adding by right to T6. And again, this will be consistent with the existing DDD standards. Continuing in Appendix A to page 401 and 402. Parking identification signs should be added as number 17. Just to be consistent with the currently adopted Downtown Development District requirements. What you see on the slide is taken from the current requirements. It's insert parking lot identification sign, 1 per driveway, maximum height of 10 feet, including the mount, maximum 2 feet tall, maximum 3 feet wide, maximum 6 square feet of signage, no restrictions, and that's in terms of copy, and allowed in T4, 5, 6, and SD deck gauge. Again, this was omitted in error and will coincide with current standards. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did somebody have a question? The last item, in terms of typos and so forth, is on page 409, street. The words which may be covered were inadvertently omitted. So the definition will have this reinserted, again, in compliance with current standards. So those are the basic typographical errors and omissions. Couple of other things that the staff would like to bring to your attention as an edit or a clarification is on page 273. That is Article 8, the definitions. In marine cargo and freight handling, we need to insert, quote, "This does not include coal handling facilities or operations." Just to bring to the commission's attention, coal handling facilities and operations are within the DDD, their own use.
Beauties.
Within the UDC, within the entire document. They are their own separate use regulated by Article 2 in the use chart. The final thing is if you go back to the DDD on page 357, in terms of the DDD has its own use chart. And the use chart is shown on page 363. You'll notice there are some uses that are allowed by right, or as special exception, or C, conditional use. On the prior pages where it goes through, you have special exception on page 357 explained. You do not, however, have conditional use permit explained. So we are adding this definition of conditional use permit, or this description of conditional use permit. Okay, I know I've kind of blew through those a little quickly. Does anyone have any questions on the clarifications and typos? Okay.
Margaret,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Beth. On the clarifications on 357, could you explain what you mean, what you're putting in as special exemptions? I'm not sure I understand what you're,
Okay.
yeah, I understand typos, that I can follow, but kind of lost me a bit.
Okay. As you may recall, the DDD, the Downtown Development District, this appendix is its own governing zoning ordinance. The only thing in the rest of the UDC that is applicable has to be done so by reference. It has to be specifically referred to. Now, if you look over on the use chart for the DDD, which is on page 263, you know, it has Rs for uses by right, S for uses that are allowed via special exception, and C for the uses that require a conditional use permit. As Article 2 of the UDC outlines, what a special exception is and what a conditional use permit is, we have to explain that in the DDD as well. And so we've done that on page 357 of Appendix A for special exception, but we did not do that for conditional use permit. So we are asking for that verbiage to be inserted.
Just the same from you.
Yes, it's the same as it is for the UDC, but because the appendix and the DDD is its own zoning code for downtown, we have to have that explanation in here.
Okay. Oh, you just brought back that slide. Okay.
Yes,
That's what
ma'am.
I was gonna ask. I just looked up. Okay, I think I'm processing.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions up to this point? Okay,
Good to go.
thank you. All right. I forwarded to the commission the bulleted comments that were presented at the public hearing from all the speakers. We took and then tried to capture them according to themes of comments. And they fell pretty much into environmental, neighborhood, the three of the overlays, Africatown, the Peninsula, and Spring Hill. And then there were a couple of a general nature. So I'm going to take these pretty much one by one. We had a request to make the riparian buffer requirements applicable to all waterfront properties with exemptions to require special approval. If you will turn in your document, the requirements are laid out or the beginning of the riparian buffer requirements. They start on page 76. And then if you will notice on the bottom of page 84, parentheses D, water dependent maritime uses, those are exempted. Now, riparian buffers are something that we have not ever regulated before via zoning. However, taking into account all of the concerns and comments that we've received, we do feel it is important to begin regulating, adopting riparian buffer standards and begin regulating our stream sides and water bodies via the zoning process. However, especially along the Mobile River, you have uses that are water dependent. Your cargo handling, your ship launching, all of those do require direct access to the water. So from our perspective, we have made a really good start with regulating riparian buffers. The other important thing to note is to construct one single-family home is also exempt, as well as heavy industrial and any future marine heavy zones with existing hardened shorelines, not proposed, existing hardened shorelines. Those would also be exempt. So at this point, the staff is not proposing any changes. It is important to remember, and this was pointed out in our presentation at the beginning of the public hearing. This is a living document. It's not perfect, but it is a starting point and can be evaluated in the future. The next request, and again, and I'll draw attention to the number of people, we do cite who provided the comments, is increased landscaping and tree planting requirements for land, and to not reduce the requirements for marine light, marine heavy, I-1 and I-2. So few things to point out, and I'm sorry, if it's helpful to you, refer to the document. You can go to page 60. That gets into some of your parking lot screening. But green space requirements have not been reduced for industrial sites. We, in the current zoning ordinance, require 12%. If you look, the landscaping requirements reflected for industrial, as shown in Article 2, are 12%. That's for light industrial, heavy industrial, marine light, and marine heavy. Additionally, as currently regulated, perimeter trees are not required in I-1 and I-2 as well. We are proposing in the UDC to not require tree plantings in the marine light, marine heavy, I-1 and I-2 parking areas, because on these industrial sites, the long-term survivability of tree plantings are generally incompatible with heavy vehicles. However, the Planning Commission may consider an amendment to the UDC as written for tree planting requirements to be provided for employee and customer parking lots outside of the truck lanes, truck parking, and so forth.
Margaret, could I ask a quick question about that, just for clarification?
Sure.
So the tree planting requirements are still going to be handled under the PUD, but the tree removal is what we recently changed to allow the tree commission to take care of instead of us doing it, right?
Let me just clarify a little bit. Tree plantings, yes, sir, are still required via this document, the UDC. Tree protections are now under the urban forester on private property. They are not part of the UDC, and they are no longer part of the existing zoning ordinance.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Just wanted to Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
I have a question
Yes, ma'am.
about
Go ahead, Ms.
landscaping.
Rich.
Thank you. What is the percentage on the different zoning classifications for site? I'm trying to, I've looked and I can't seem to find it. I see
Sure.
spacing and everything, but we
Right.
used to deal with a certain percentage. Where would I find that in this document?
Article 2, under the corresponding zoning district. If you're looking specifically for the marine or industrial, go to page 21 through 25.
Okay, what about the B1 and B2 and B3? What page is that on?
Start on page 12.
And what, do you know off the top of your head, what percentage needs to be landscaped for those categories?
All right, in B1, it depends on whether you're urban or suburban. If you're urban, it's 5%, but for suburban, it's 15, which is higher than what is required now.
What is it, 12% now?
Yes, ma'am. And that urban suburban distinction is pretty consistent moving upward.
Has it been 12% citywide for the longest time?
Yes, ma'am.
And you went to 5% for urban?
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Denson?
Well, my question was going to be if we wanted to consider adding the requirements for employee and customer parking lots in the ML, MH1, I1, and I2, what would be your recommendations for that? Does the staff have a recommendation for that, or?
Well, that is, we don't have specific wording. However, if the commission wants that amendment to the UDC, they would need to let us know.
So would that be something we would vote on today, or how would we handle that?
Second one, do it, we prepare it.
Yeah.
present it at the next meeting.
Yeah, if that's something the commission would like for us to do, we can present specific verbiage for the commission to approve for inclusion into the document.
Well, because I'm thinking, if we look at, I have certain visions in my mind of very large customer and employee parking lots at some of the I2 and I1 facilities. I mean, I think that it would be beneficial to add the landscaping and the tree planting and creating shade in those areas.
Right, okay. We can come up with some verbiage.
But, that I'm one person of a group, so I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, or if they would feel this was something to.
It's something I'd like to look into too. I think it would be a good solution.
We really,
And
what we can do is we can come up with some exact verbiage to present back to the commission when this comes up. But we noted that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I need to go back to that urban section where you have 5%. That seems like a big decline on landscaping. Is that for any size in the urban area? I mean, automatically it's a 5%. And how was that decision arrived at?
Basically, in urban environments, when you look at the older areas of town when they were developed with more building on the site in general, not quite as automobile dependent as suburban areas. And they don't provide as much green space. You know, it's part of the difference in character that you see between urban and suburban. In urban environments, frequently the parking's to the side, possibly the rear, or even on street. Buildings are situated more closely to the street, and they're more compact developments.
Yeah, but there's a lot of examples. We can drive around in the urban area of town that got strip malls and took a lot of space out to do a project, a development. And then if they get redesigned, they're going to get designed with even less greenery.
I agree on your first part in that you have older areas of town that have been leveled and basically have a more suburban feel. Consequently, they do not fit in with the fabric of the surrounding neighborhood. I mean, we can all sit here and come up with examples of that. We are wanting, through not just the landscaping standards, but from the site development standards, trying to encourage development that fits in with the character of the neighborhood. And that's just one element.
So Ms. Pappas, to that point, the things that have been developed up to now have been operating under the needing 12% on their site, right?
Correct.
And have they been consistently asking for waivers of that number or anything like that?
We may have had some that did, but they're also being forced to design with a suburban site standard as well. They aren't, the existing zoning ordinance doesn't give a lot of option for commercial sites to develop in a manner that's consistent with the surrounding neighborhood.
Margaret,
The surrounding neighborhood to this point has had to have 12% coverage. Right?
Correct. But they also have to have setbacks, and they end up with the sea of parking up front as well.
Now that after the disagreement in concept with other codes and guidelines that have been in place,
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. It was kind of garbled up, that comment.
I was just applauding Margaret and their efforts in the comment. This change would bring it in concept with codes and guidelines already in place and get what the whole intent of the UDC is about and make it easy for people in the process for those who are not. So.
But a lot of the suburban kind of look that got into Midtown and even downtown in the 60s, there wasn't the 12%. When did the 12% come on the books for developments to put in the 12%?
The 12,
you know?
The 12% was a sliding scale that made its way. It started in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Maxed out in the early 90s. I think I couldn't hear all of what Cart was saying either, but I think he was kind of talking about the fabric of the neighborhood. The one thing this may help the commission understand, you know, the staff worked using GIS in terms of mapping the urban-suburban dichotomy. And there were several factors that we used, and I'll just mention them. One is whether or not the area was in an existing historic district, and that's not just regulated by the city of Mobile, but that's also historic districts that are on the National Registry, but not locally recognized. We also took into account lot size and the presence of a grid pattern. We looked at older aerials and looked at the time when the area was developed, and also looked for the presence of former streetcar lines. So there were several criteria that went into mapping the urban versus suburban zoning sub-district.
And do we have, is there a map that follows zoning codes and this urban suburban districts? Is that part of what's being adopted too?
Yes, ma'am, that is, the existing zoning districts are the same. We are not changing the zoning or for any piece of property. The only thing we are doing is adding that additional layer of urban versus suburban. And you have to realize as well that there's not an urban suburban dichotomy for every single zoning district. It's just for residential, B1, LB2, B2, and B3. But the map itself, I'll send you the link to it.
Okay, so there will be a map adopted as part of this plan that shows all the zoning sites, even though you say there's no changes, I get that, but, and then you have this urban and suburban layer.
Correct. That's the only distinction.
And you're gonna send us a link to that, which, okay.
Gotcha.
And I think that may be helpful to bring.
Okay. Yeah, someone just mentioned, it's only the B1 urban that'll be at 5%. B1 suburban is 15. Same with the B2 and the B3 and LB2.
And I think this is Taylor. I think it's also important to point out that these urban sub-districts also have maximum setbacks as well that keep from the, putting a building way in the back with a sea of parking lot and no landscaping. It's kind of because of the maximum setbacks, it's to promote the close building and also as a reason for the lesser percent requirement for landscaping.
But they would come into code if they did 50% or more renovations. And if they stay on their footprint, they don't make the 50% in the future, correct? Is that still the rules or zoning?
Okay, yes, ma'am. Just to clarify, of course, anything new from the ground up, new construction on a site, you have a vacant site, you start building, these would be the standards. An existing site, they only apply if you add 50% or more.
And staying on your footprint constitutes at least 50%, correct? Do I understand that?
No, ma'am, if you stay within your existing footprint and just renovate within your building, that does not apply. It's square footage. You would have to add an addition.
The 50% renovation in your existing square footage makes you come up to the International Building Code, not necessarily the zoning code.
That's correct. And that's how, like the landscaping standards in the current zoning ordinance, that's how they're applicable as well. Under environmental, the next request from Dog River Clearwater Revival. They want increased regulations concerning to environmental impacts. What we can do is, for example, litter. That's regulated by City Code Chapter 25. They also wanted some cross-referencing to the stormwater standards. So we were going to again enter some cross-referencing, referring the reader to City Code Chapter 17. The UDC does not regulate litter, nor does it regulate stormwater. But we were going to include cross-references to those city code chapters. An additional comment from Dog River Clearwater Revival was to include regulations for low impact development standards and additional stormwater management. I will point out that while it refers the reader in the peninsula overlay, which is Article 12, it does require a lid standard element be incorporated. It further refers the reader to the city's stormwater ordinance. The city's stormwater manual is currently being updated. As I just stated, a lid standard element is required if the site falls within the peninsula overlay. In looking at these standards, staff worked very closely with city engineering, and city engineering does have concern that given the city's rainfall, there are concerns about these low impact development standards. So the peninsula and the lid standards are being implemented as a first step. More study is needed to determine if this is a practice that can be successfully implemented citywide. We had some comments submitted by Ms. Tessner and the Tree Commission regarding the landscape plan. Some specific requests were the location of all existing trees with a DBH of 3 inches or larger, the location of all heritage trees within 25 feet of construction work. That includes off-site trees, illustration of critical root zones of trees, again, both on and off-site within 25 feet of construction, and then certification by a licensed arborist, landscape architect, or certified landscape professional for tree work. The location of an overhanging canopy from adjacent properties can be considered. Again, that's the canopy of the tree hanging over the site to be developed. However, the location of trees located on other properties creates an issue of trespass. The location of trees as small as 3 inches may occur if the trees are being claimed for credit, but requiring the location of all trees on a site could become an extreme cost for any applicant. Neighborhood character. Dr. Beauty.
Margaret, may I ask a quick question before you move to the next topic?
Yes, ma'am.
Looking back over the notes from the public hearing and the material that was submitted, the tree commission had also mentioned something about the requirement for frontage and perimeter trees that they say talked about has been changed from every 3 feet to one every 50 feet. You may have already discussed this or responded to this, and I apologize if I'm asking a repeat, but can you address that a little bit?
I'm gonna start and then I'm gonna ask Bert to pick it up.
Okay.
We have a right tree, right place document. And based on the type of tree you're proposing, it may need more room to grow. So there are requirements based for a specific type of tree. You have to provide this much area in a concentric shape for it to grow in. The perimeter trees, right now, the requirement in industrial area, they are not required in industrial areas right now. So there is no change there. Bert, I'm gonna probably need for you to kind of pick up on some additional detail.
So the issue with our current frontage and perimeter tree requirements is that there are no spacing requirements at this time. So let's say you have a property that requires 12 perimeter trees. There's nothing to prevent you from putting them all in a room the size of the conference room that we're sitting in right now. And we've seen developments throughout Mobile where this has happened. So in order to accommodate mandatory minimum spacing of any trees planted, as well as to address some complaints that we've received about too many trees being required, and thus you can't see the business or the signage or anything, we are proposing to adjust the distance when you're calculating how many trees are required. So for your front tree requirement, you take your front property width along the street and divide that by 40. And that tells you how many tree credits you have to have, or plant units. Then of all that, you have to have at least one overstory tree or equivalent for every 50 feet of that frontage. So if you have a 120-foot wide property, divide that by 40, that means you have to have 3 plant units. You look on the right tree, right place UDC plant list, and you can choose from overstory and understory trees, and they'll have credits assigned to them. But you will have to make sure that at least maybe 2 of those 3 credits will have to be overstory trees.
Okay.
So we're stepping back from requiring all frontage trees to always be overstory, but we are mandating that some of them still have to be overstory. And then for the perimeter trees, we're doing that calculation using a 1 plant unit for every 50 feet versus right now it's 1 per 30 feet. Now, that will result in fewer perimeter trees. However, we are increasing the requirements for trees actually within parking lot areas. So rather than having all the trees stuffed to the side of a property, the way we're proposing it is that there will be more trees planted throughout the parking lot, so you'll have more opportunities for parking and shade than what we might have to.
Okay. Thank you. That provides a lot of clarity.
I have a question about the right tree and right place. Where is that list that someone can refer to?
It's on the website.
It's on the Map for Mobile website. It should be in the same area where you can find this version of the ordinance as well.
but it's not part of, I mean, that's a suggestion. It's not a mandatory or a code or anything.
It's adopted by reference. And I did.
It is on that page, but there it is.
Right here.
Is that an internal policy, or is that part of, that will be adopted as the code and followed from henceforward?
It's adopted by reference. So if it needs to be amended, let's say, for instance, we had issues in this area a few years back with a boar attacking a dogwood. Quite frankly, we would remove a dogwood from that tree list. So that can be done administratively, given the situation at hand. But the adoption of the list is done by reference when this code is adopted.
Okay.
Okay, did anyone else have any questions on the environmental issues? Okay, moving on to neighborhood character. Request number 1 from Dr. Butera and the Coalition for Intelligent Economic Growth. Increased regulations pertaining to protection buffers for residential property. Comments submitted, he referred to previous versions. And then comments submitted from this organization requested a 200-foot mandatory separation between B2 and B3 uses and residential property. Buffer requirements in the current UDC are improved in that no parking is allowed within the buffer. However, lot depth in some areas may make increasing setback requirements infeasible. So at this point, we do not have any specifics. However, we're not able to do something with a 200-foot separation. Dr. Butera and Joe Lomack also wanted more definition on what constitutes a neighborhood meeting and requiring documentation submitted with the application. The neighborhood meeting, just to kind of give some context, what has been found with various organizations is these neighborhood meetings typically work better when they're set up with displays and areas within which to meet with people and have individual or small group discussions. Not necessarily a situation where you have one person standing behind a podium speaking to a mass of people and there's no real exchange of information and concerns. Based on some research we've done from other jurisdictions, we're suggesting that a summary be submitted, but it will include the following: the attendee list, the list of concerns regarding the proposal, and a compilation of attendee comments and applicant responses. Of course, if some of, a member of the neighborhood is able to look over that, that would be great. However, we can't force a neighbor, to read the document prior to submission.
Margaret,
Yes, ma'am.
excuse me. What jurisdictions and cities did you look at for these type of recommendations? And who is submitting it? The applicant it's kind of silent there.
No, it's required to be submitted by the applicant. And
Okay.
we looked at Decatur.
Okay. Any other cities?
No, ma'am. Decatur specifically has a neighborhood meeting requirement. There's not a lot of cities that do.
Since this neighborhood meeting and the summary will be submitted with the application, will it also be online along with the application before the planning commission in case, I know it was raised that the applicant, someone in the neighborhood, like you mentioned, should be able to look at it, but at least it allows the neighborhood to go back and see what was submitted with the application?
Okay, due to some timing concerns, the application can be submitted without the neighborhood meeting. However, the neighborhood meeting must occur prior to the planning commission meeting. Now, what we can do is a matter of process, or it can be referenced, is when we forward the staff report to the commission and post it online, we can post the neighborhood meeting summary.
I don't know. I think that might be, I know as a planning commission member, I would like to see the neighborhood meeting notes and summary in advance. And I think that it might be helpful and very transparent for the community to be able to see it as well. But I'll, of course, defer to what others think.
No, that would save everybody a lot of headaches.
Yeah, hey, Margaret, this is Shirley Sessions.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
know, I guess I want to piggyback on what Jennifer said about the neighborhood meeting. I remember the application that was recently submitted to us that Attorney Pipes was included in that application down Texas Street Place, whatever. I was a little concerned when the applicant brought it back without a neighborhood meeting after promising the commission that they would have a meeting and then wanted us to vote on it. But so I agree with Jennifer. If we had it up front, it would kind of save a lot of time of going back and forth with the applicant not having the meeting, because that's the first thing that was asked, did you have a meeting? So that's just my comment.
The meeting will have to occur as drafted prior to the planning commission meeting. It's simply that the deadline to submit's a month ahead. But again, the neighborhood meeting has to occur prior to the application being heard by the commission, and presenting the summary of that meeting to the commission can be included as part of the staff report.
I have one more question about the timing. I think I read that the notice for the neighborhood meeting is anywhere from 30 days to no less than 10 days before the meeting. But I don't recall the deadline for submitting it. If you don't submit it with your application, what is the deadline to submitting it to the planning commission? I know there was an automatic holdover. I believe I read if there's not submitted. Am I confusing two different things, or is?
I think you may be crossing two different things, but the neighborhood meeting, hold on. Okay, If you look on page 209, 65(4)(b)(2). If the neighborhood meeting has not been held prior to the submission of the application, then it shall be held no less than 21 days prior to the planning commission hearing date.
Okay.
So if we do not have the summary of that neighborhood meeting when the reports are being prepared and sent, it's not a complete application and would not proceed.
Margaret?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, again. The neighborhood meetings, you're saying the applicant interprets everything, I guess I'm not following. Who double checks that it took place and that there was conversation and maybe a different take from people present, regardless of what type of meeting it was? Is the staff gonna
No.
attend those things to be
No, ma'am.
okay,
ma'am.
so it's just strictly the applicant, and what documentation is required from the applicant on a meeting? We had a meeting such and such a date is adequate, or
If you look at page 211, it outlines in E1A through F.
211, you said?
211.
That's pretty comprehensive.
Well, and that's why I was suggesting that if we post it online, that it allows the neighborhood the opportunity to see what the applicant has said. And if there is any discrepancy, they can always come to the hearing or send in comments or whatnot to clarify the record, so to speak.
Correct. And if you read on down to number 4, the applicant has to submit this no later than 15 days prior to the hearing date with the commission.
And the summary of the minutes, they're not the full minutes that someone transcribes for the
Correct.
applicant?
That's correct. It's a summary or minute as written. We are suggesting a summary because, again, if you have individual discussion groups, you can summarize what's occurring.
Margaret,
And when you say a list of all property owners, what is that, 300 feet like we
Yes.
do now? What is the requirement on the list of all property owners?
It is the same as is required for the corresponding application, which is 300 feet.
so the applicant is required to reach out to this list of people that the city sends out notices to. And if there's an interest and a desire to have a meeting from these residents, from these neighbors, then the meeting is required. But if there's no response, then what documentation does the applicant provide?
No, sir, the meeting's required. If no one shows up, then the applicant would simply document that. But the meeting is required for rezoning, conditional use permit.
Right, okay.
It's required. And the notice is to be sent out by the applicant. It is the same notice as we would send out in terms of who is notified for the public hearing.
Okay.
The one thing to point out too, in terms of, a summary, it's a neighborhood meeting. It's not a public hearing.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, that's not till you come to the planning commission
Right.
for the public hearing. Right. But is it, it's people within 300 feet have to be invited. Others can attend, of course, and
Yes,
they would be listed. But as far as the elements of what's in that meeting, it's a summary back to the planning commission and put online as well. Would that be put online, the summary?
we can, like I said, if, we're taking notes of things that the commission is highlighting, and that summary can be incorporated. I can tell you already, the applications primarily are available online to look at, which they would be a part of that application and viewable. But again, the easiest thing, just thinking off the top of my head, we can easily incorporate them into the staff report that's put forward to the commission.
I just feel like that would make it nice for us to understand what the gist of the neighborhood meeting was. And it would give the opportunity for anybody that attended the neighborhood meeting that may have a different take on it to be prepared for our meeting rather than being blindsided.
I understand, I agree.
My only concern would be is if we're going to put too much of a workload on the staff, because the people that are at that meeting are also probably going to be at the planning commission meeting when we have that as well. So is that going to create too much of a workload for the staff?
In terms of being able to incorporate the summary into the report, no, sir, that's minimal. That's minimal additional effort. We could also speak with our web provider and see if we could just add that to each application to go ahead and get it out there.
Okay.
But I think being able to post it for people to review prior to the hearing is something that we can get done. Bert?
Well, also, you have to remember, it's not the intention that staff will be attending the neighborhood meeting.
Right.
So this will be solely on the applicant to provide the information, and staff just has to make sure it's part of the application that's available for public review.
So it might also be nice if when they got their application materials, when the developers got the application materials, if they had a form that we want them to submit it back on, to give them some guidelines for what you're looking for. So that you
Right.
don't get all willy-nilly everywhere and they know what it is they're supposed to do at their meeting.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Margaret, I'm gonna have to leave. I've got a 3:30 appointment, so hopefully I won't miss anything too drastically important, but
Okay.
thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you. The next request under neighborhood character, we had this comment from the power company. Basically to allow utilities by right in all commercial and industrial zoning districts. If you look at the use chart, specifically page 37 and 38, you have utilities. And you're divided into minor, intermediate, and major utilities. Really, it's on the left side of page 38. In the definition section, utilities, those various strata are defined. Minor utilities are allowed by right in all districts, which is similar to how we have some things now for minor utilities. Intermediate utilities require special exception in residential districts and some lower intensity commercial districts, and are allowed by right in heavier commercial and industrial and maritime districts. That is very similar to how we regulate the power substations right now, in terms of where they're allowed by right and where they require planning approval. However, major utilities are only allowed in B3, 5, commercial warehouse, and the maritime, light, heavy, and industrial as a conditional use permit. Again, this is very similar to how we currently regulate power generation plants, water sewage treatment plants, and things of that nature. As a matter of fact, the Planning Commission reviewed an application for Alabama Power for a new substation near 3 Mile Creek, near St. Stephen's or Dr. King Avenue within the past 6 months. It was a planning approval, rezoning, and subdivision. So again, the manner in which we're regulating Alabama Power and the other utilities is very similar to the current regulations we have now.
So what exactly is it that they're even asking for? Because they can already put minor utilities by right in everywhere they need to go. So, do they want to be able to put a substation in the middle of neighborhoods? What are they asking for?
Based on my read of the comments submitted, they want their utilities by right. Now we've simplified and said in all commercial and industrial zoning. But if that's B1 right adjacent to the neighborhood, we have concerns. Now, we also understand that, they need to be able to locate where the service is needed or where improved service is needed, but additional scrutiny for intermediate and major utilities is needed, because while they serve the neighborhood, there needs to be additional safeguards in place for the development of that site for the neighborhood.
Agreed.
The next one is also from the power company, and it's for a reduction in permitting and applicability requirements for neighborhood telecommunications facilities. We have within the existing document, the existing UDC, allowances for smart metering, network monitoring, and security, which is consistent with the existing zoning ordinance and state law. However, federal law requires similarly situated providers to be treated equally. So the telecommunications requirements that are in Article 5 as drafted, we feel provide that equality across the providers.
So are you saying that you feel that they'll be able to use these allowances to address their concerns about having to get permitting for all of these items?
We do. This is Jim Rossler. Yes, ma'am. When we first started working on this, Alabama Power contacted us and explained their smart metering systems.
Mm-hmm.
And our response was, yeah, we get it. Then they came back and said, well, it's a little bit more than smart metering. It's also network monitoring. And they explained how when there's an outage somewhere, there'll be communications back, and also network security. And we said, okay, we get that, and we'll write that into the exception. And then they came back and said, well, it's a little bit more than that. We also have cameras and other security systems that are connected. And we said, we get that too. So we wrote all of those into the exception that says that utility companies, not just power, but also gas, electricity, of course, water, sewer, are exempt from the permitting requirements for classes 1, 2, and 3 for any internal utility company communications, which include the advanced metering or smart metering systems, the security monitoring, the monitoring for usage and capacity and performance. So we believe that we have addressed all of their issues.
Okay.
The next one's also from the power company. Reduce permitting and applicability requirements for environmental and light trespass regulations pertaining to utilities. Again, the current proposed requirements are intended to protect neighborhood and environmentally sensitive areas from potential nuisances such as light trespass. We received on every version several comments regarding the impact of lighting in environmentally sensitive areas. And so we feel like we need to apply those standards across the board. Now, if there is a special situation regarding security, they could still avail themselves of the variance process.
Okay.
The next area we have are the overlay. And so we'll have Africa Town here first. This is from Ramsey Spread. Provide a clear purpose and intent for the Africa Town overlay, focusing on preserving the community and encouraging redevelopment. We do propose to outline the purpose and intent and incorporate that to the beginning of their overlay, and then update the existing sections with new numbering. We are also proposed to cross-reference the applicability of the other articles in the UDC to reinforce their applicability to development within the Africa Town overlay. That of course has to do with things, with buffering, additional regulation of uses such as above ground oil storage tanks and things of that nature. The other thing that I would point out is in terms of encouraging redevelopment, the overlay is mapped as an urban area. As such, they have more flexible standards for redevelopment in terms of their residential properties. They have 4,000 square foot minimum standards for lots. They also have allowances to renovate or rebuild on the existing footprint of the structure. Again, to allow the more compatible design and construction standards of that neighborhood. Regarding the above ground oil storage tanks and hazardous substance materials, they had submitted comments from Ramsey Spread, Herbert Wagner, and Lola Lowe. However, the existing above ground oil storage tank ordinance went into effect in 2016 after a long and rigorous public hearing process. I believe most of the commission members were involved in that process. You have several groups of interest at the table. The document, the UDC, has those same standards in place as was adopted in 2016. The other issue to point out is that since adoption, no storage tanks regulated by this section have been built in Applicability. There is a additional comment from Ramsey Sprague, Lella Lowe, and Joe Womack regarding a revision of protection buffers for areas where industrial or maritime districts adjoin residential districts to require a 10-foot wall. The commission may consider additional buffering between industrial and residential properties. However, a sweeping requirement such as that may have unintended negative consequences. Further consideration may be given to privacy fencing with additional landscaping blocking visibility and maintenance in a compliant manner, as well as other buffering methods. But we do have concerns regarding a blanket 10-foot wall requirement.
Hey, Margaret,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Shirley Sessions. Can you explain further or just expand on that second sentence that says, however, as a sweeping requirement, there may be unintended negative consequences? Ooh, can't say it. But can you expand on that? What type of negative consequences there might be?
You know, sometimes walls are not the best answer. While staff understands from a planning perspective a need for buffering between residential and industrial development, sometimes additional landscaping and some form of additional privacy fencing provides more of a buffer than just erecting one big 10-foot wall. You know, if you had fencing that kept out debris and then properly placed trees and shrubbery to give some height as well as lower level visual barrier, that could soften the impact on the community. Additionally, some things, you know, some additional buffering options could be explored. But we do have concerns that just saying a 10-foot wall may not be the best option for the neighborhood or the industry.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So how could we add some of the additional buffering options without making a sweeping 10-foot wall requirement?
Again, staff's got a kind of a running list going here. If this is something the commission would like us to conduct some further research regarding additional buffers between industrial and residential, other than just a 10-foot wall, we can do that.
I think that would be worthwhile, particularly in this community that is so close to industry right there. And this has been a continuing concern and issue with Africatown and their neighborhood and their desires.
Right. Well, and two, you know, a wall would only obscure so much. We'll
Agree.
This is another comment from Ramsey Sprague, asking that the coal handling be removed from the UDC and a separate review and adoption process. Not saying that's a bad idea. However, right now, the current zoning ordinance does not separately regulate coal handling. Based on a recent court decision, coal handling is considered stevedoring and cargo handling, and thus allowed by right in industrial and maritime districts. We would advocate that the coal handling remain in the UDC as a specific regulated use under the proposed UDC. If another document comes forward, we could address it at that time, but we would like to get some forward momentum going here. The next overlay is the peninsula. We had a similar, an environmental comment back in the earlier section. And again, just asking for those cross-referencing with stormwater management and nuisances, specifically litter and blight, and we will incorporate those cross-references in Article 12.
Margaret, I've been asked what to define the peninsula. People are
Oh,
asking about the
I am
actual
so sorry.
the actual geography.
Got you.
And we could just simply tell people what that is.
Okay.
The Dolphin Island Parkway area.
Yes, yes, basically south of I-10. We had two comments on the Village of Spring Hill overlay. This one's from Linda Gate. There were some others that didn't address the commission with similar comments, but comments on previous versions of the UDC requested that the adopted plan for the Village of Spring Hill be made mandatory. The Village of Spring Hill plan is primarily zoning in nature, and at this point, it is proposed to be a mandatory standard and no longer optional.
Margaret, I do have a comment on Spring Hill. This has been a continuing conversation ever since they first started coming before the planning commission, before I ever got on it. And they reached, my understanding is they reached an agreement, a compromise, which wound up with it being voluntary instead of mandatory. And if that is in fact what happened, and I believe it is what happened, I'm not sure we should change it, just flat out change it when the condition for it being adopted in the first place was based on it being voluntary. And I just would like to ask what everybody else thinks about that.
Well, I think we've seen both comments going both ways, so there's still certainly contention. Margaret, do you know if there's particular parts of the overlay that are the most contentious, or something that people just really do not want to be mandatory and maybe the rest of it is, or do we just not, I don't really, it's been a number of years. I don't quite remember the arguments between the for and the against.
I guess my position is if we did go forward with adopting their plan, because by it being voluntary, I'm not sure at this point in time we should then turn around and make it mandatory. Just throwing that out.
If y'all don't mind, this is Doug. Let me make a few comments on the history of this. When this came up in 07 or 08, and the Village Association put this overlay district forward to the Planning Commission and the council, I represent a lot of the property owners up there, the commercial property owners. And the biggest issue at that point in time was the fact that the village ordinances, or the overlay, was, it required a property owner to give up land for alleyways and side streets. And that, we argued, was a improper taking, illegal taking. And so at that point in time, you had that issue, you had the alleyway, the network of streets, and also had the design guidelines that were set forth. the minimum setbacks and those kind of things. As I understand now, it's all about design. What the overlay district has proposes now is it's not taking of any alleys, not creating the alleys from private property, but it's all about the design aspect of it. So that's what I understand, and Margaret or Jim can correct me, but as I understand it, that's the main difference between back then and now.
In terms of what you're bringing up regarding the alleyways and so forth, oh, Bert, we discussed it this morning. Where is it?
It's towards the front of the chapter. I think under regulated.
Got it. Okay, on page 321, section 6413.3, capital B, proposed new streets located on the regulating plans are permitted but not required, which addresses the concern you referenced.
And back then, in 12, 13 years ago, we didn't reach an agreement. The city council decided that those alleyways were an illegal taking probably and should not be advanced in the overlay district. So the council approved it, just making it optional and not mandatory. The only agreement that was made was during the moratorium that the council had imposed, and we reached an agreement on the design and construction of that CVS at the corner of Old Chill and McGregor. That's the only issue that we really agreed to. Everything else was just voted on by the city council.
Okay.
Muted. I have a question. It's best. Doug, is it legal to have either optional or voluntary conditions? I mean, I see that as a political kind of tuck in. I was not on council, so I can't speak to, what transpired, but how does that legally work from a defensible standpoint to have something that's either, it's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't be. So how does that work?
You mean if the overlay district, if it's approved now, part of it's mandatory and part of it's optional?
Yeah.
I'll let Jim join in on this, but I don't see anything illegal about that. You're giving the property owners a choice in certain aspects of it, but not all of it. So I don't see anything legally wrong with that. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you.
Okay, so it goes back to 2008, you said, when they voted on this optional aspect of planning
Yes,
for zoning classification for an area, correct? Because
correct.
It wasn't called an overlay, they called the village, and then they put that in motion as far as coordinates, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if you have an overlay and it's supposed to have certain standards, I mean, have we evolved to moving those standards up? I mean, 6 years ago, we sat down with charrettes and 500 people in attendance, and, there was a lot of energy about change, and it was, to make quality of life. And I think when you look at an overlay, you're distinctly talking about quality of life in the aesthetics and in the look. And so I think there's a lot of support, and to say that there was time to have this evolve is, I think that was a good thing. But I personally feel like to look at these overlays and have standards, not some pick and choose, is probably important, because we're doing other overlays for the first time, which could become a standard throughout the city for neighborhood areas to become overlays. So I see that as energy that is quite positive.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. As far as different overlays within the city having different requirements. I think it's what each individual area wants. What the peninsula, what Africa Town, and what Spring Hill wants could be different things. So, you know, certainly they can be different. They don't have to have the same standards. Yeah, one thing we discussed at the staff meeting last week when we were getting ready for this meeting is that there have been several of the main commercial property owners in the village area in the last few years come up with plans that did comply with the design standards.
Yes.
There is a lot of momentum for some of the property owners, the commercial property owners, and I think that's what it's going to mostly affect is the commercial properties at these intersections. And there's certainly been some momentum that supports.
It's been positive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like you, I think the most important thing you said, Bess, was that some of it is going to be political.
Oh, yes.
We did have one other comment on the Village of Spring Hill overlay, and that is regarding maintaining buffer regulations between commercial development and residential properties. This was submitted by Erica Jones. There are buffer requirements within the Spring Hill overlay, which allow for garden walls. However, the commission may consider additional stipulations that specifically require a 6-foot high buffer where a commercial use abuts a residential use in the overlay. Parking standards in the overlay generally place the parking areas behind buildings, which effectively means you have parking located closer to the residences. So it's possible via the neighborhood toolkit, a Sandtown regulating plan with different standards could be pursued. So again, kind of piggybacking on what Ms. Rich said about, you know, the neighborhoods and their overlay, and just creating an additional regulating plan within the village plan for the Sandtown community. We have two final comments that are just kind of general in nature. As you recall, you may have heard Casey Pipes suggest a benefits consideration. And that is possible. He of course kind of provided some additional wording for applications made under this article. Decision maker must also consider the city's and the larger community's best interest and weigh the need, benefit, or public purpose of the proposed request, structure, development, or approval in making their decision. Usually, most of the approval criteria sets forth what it cannot do. So Mr. Pipes had suggested this additional wording in communicating with legal counsel. This could be added as approval criteria to rezonings, conditional use permits, plan developments, and special exceptions. So in Article 5 procedures for those various application types, you have approval criteria for each one of those, and you could incorporate this wording into those approval criteria. And then the second we had under general was submitted by Lewis Golden, requesting reduce the parking requirements for self-storage facilities. based on the number of units and office space. And looking at it, offices require 1 space per 400 square feet of office area. And then we would recommend the provision of 1 parking space for each 50 storage units. Okay. That's everything the staff had prepared for the commission's review. Based on our discussion, we will come back with some parking planting suggestions for the employee and customer parking areas in the I-1, I-2, marine light, marine heavy. Some additional information regarding the neighborhood, the summary of the neighborhood meeting and how the public, the neighborhood gets an opportunity to see that prior to the meeting. We will also look at some additional buffering between industrial and residential properties.
Can I ask a question, Margaret?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you go back to Batira's comments about buffering from commercial to residential? Because I don't see 200 feet being requested in his comments.
And you won't, but if you notice, he kept referring back to what he had submitted before, and I had to go back and dig it up. And
Right.
that's
Okay.
where it was.
But I think in all sincerity, he realized that that would not be something amenable. So when he spoke in this last time, he was pretty clear about not bringing that up, or he would have used it in his comments. So I really wish that the staff would look at better buffering from commercial to residential. Either a masonry wall like we've seen with the Publix that happened in Midtown. I mean, right now it's a 6-foot privacy fence or 10 feet. Is that the code now? Do I have that correct?
It's a minimum 6 feet, but in no case, just under standard buffering requirements, in no case higher than 8.
Right, and then, or a 10-foot landscape. Is that what we have?
Correct. That's probably where you're
Okay, I think one of the biggest bones of contention as now that neighborhoods are set in and commercial is already there, if there are renovations, if there is a new tenant, or if and he talks about parking lot greenery being imposed if they'd make parking lots. So just some ideas that could perhaps be incorporated to make the commercial to the residential, which seems to be one of the biggest problems for people in having to abut, and therefore, making it less valuable in the neighborhood, all of them, all the homes, to look at how we can make that better. I mean, I think that was one of the things that people talked about in the very beginning was, newness to looking at commercial and abutting residential. It's not just in 6, it's all over the city. But I just wanted to make sure that your comment, his request was not anything to do, even if he did it in the past, I don't believe that was the request that he gave in this public hearing on the 4th version.
Well, and like I said, he kept referring to prior versions.
I understand. No, I'm not accusing you of saying that you're trying to make it a standard that he was still. I get where you're coming from, but in reading over, and it just took me time, or I would have questioned when that slide came up.
That's fine. That's fine. And as we're needing to look at buffering for industrial, we can look for some additional buffering standards.
Yes,
Um,
that's really, that you got it. And, you know, that would be great. And also, can we look at page 215 on procedures for city council action? Especially since we have legal counsel here. And if you look at B, when you get there,
Yes,
okay, within 30 days of receipt of the planning commission's final report and recommendation, the city council shall, it should be may place the item on an agenda for the scheduling of a public hearing. Shall means that they will do it. And may is, it is up to the council to call for the public hearing. You kind of say that, you know, in general, as you read down C and D. So I think that shall become may.
So we need some time limit in there or time frame.
Yes, because after 30 days by state law, if it's not called, it's automatically denied, if I understand correctly. So it should be that the city council may place the item. It's not shall.
We'll take a look at that. I hear where you're coming from.
Okay,
we'll
I
take a
just
look
got
at
to
that.
follow state code on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret, I just want to, this is Jennifer, I just want to commend you and your team and Shayla and everyone for this presentation today. I thought this was just extremely well organized and well thought out, and just was really well done. And thank you for all of the hard work y'all have been doing on this entire project. But I just want to say thank you.
well, thank you. And it is truly a team. It is not an individual effort at all.
Well, I'd like to echo Jennifer's sentiments. You've made it easier. That doesn't mean it's easy, but you've made it easier.
Okay, well, we got a list of things we're gonna do, and we're gonna try and get this to y'all at your next commission meeting, which is on the 15th.
Perfect, thank
It
you.
will send y'all some emails prior to of anything we get.
Sounds great.
All right,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, it's yours now.
Okay, great. And thank you for all your hard work and for your attention to detail. And we look forward to continue to work through this process to get to that finish line. Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Everybody take care.
Thank you.